The first flurries came as the lone camper pitched their tent in the valley, nestled between dense evergreens. Winter had arrived early, but the forecast had called for only a light dusting. It was nothing the seasoned outdoorsmen couldn't handle. They had survived worse in the wilderness, or so they thought. The storm began its assault overnight. The wind howled like a living thing, whipping the sides of the tent and rattling the trees. By dawn, snow blanketed the ground, ankle-deep and still falling. The camper made a fire, brewed coffee, and watched the storm from the mouth of the tent. "I'll wait it out," they muttered to themselves, wrapping their coat tighter. "It'll pass." It didn't. By the third day, the snowdrifts were waist-high, the firewood pile had vanished under the unyielding snow, and the camper had to dig down to retrieve it. Each trip outside left them shivering and drenched, their gloves and boots failing against the biting cold. The storm showed no signs of relenting. Instead, it seemed to intensify, the flakes falling thick and fast, carried by relentless winds. It didn't just cover the ground, it buried everything. The camper watched in disbelief as the snow crept higher than the tent, forcing them to constantly dig out an entrance. By the fifth day, the snow was deeper than the camper was tall. Everything had disappeared. The valley became an endless expanse of white, no longer recognizable. 2 more days, the camper whispered, trying to convince themselves. It has to stop. But the snow continued. On the 7th day, their food supply dwindled. Digging for firewood was no longer an option. The snow was too deep and packed too tightly. The camper's world shrank to the confines of the tent, where the bitter cold seeped through every seam. They began to hear things in the wind. Faint whispers and distant laughter, mocking and cruel. At first, they thought it was their mind playing tricks on them, the isolation taking its toll. But the voices grew louder at night, surrounding the tent, pressing in. By the 10th day, hunger and cold had transformed the camper into a shadow of themselves. They no longer whispered assurances to themselves. They no longer believed in an end to the storm. By the time the snow finally stopped, 2 weeks after the first flurries, the camper was long gone. The snow, now covering even the tallest trees, cocooned their lifeless body in its icy embrace. The valley was silent once more, its pristine white surface giving no hint of the horrors buried beneath. Months passed, and spring finally arrived. When the sun warmed the valley, the snow began to melt with ferocity, releasing a deluge of water. The camper's body, carried by the flood, tumbled downstream. The torrent swept them into a small town at the valley's edge, where the waters deposited them at the gate of an old cemetery. The body came to rest between 2 weathered graves, the markers worn. A local groundskeeper found the body and alerted authorities. The discovery shocked the town, but the shock deepened when an investigation into the remains uncovered a harrowing truth. Years ago, on a foggy autumn night, a hit-and-run driver had killed 2 young siblings crossing the road in front of their house. The driver was never found, leaving the family to mourn their loss in anguish. The siblings were buried side by side in the same cemetery. Forensic evidence tied the body from the storm to the crime. The camper, long assumed an unfortunate victim of the elements, was revealed to be the perpetrator of the hit-and-run. The townspeople whispered of the storm as more than natural, a punishment perhaps, or the justice of the spirits themselves. Though no one could say for certain, one thing was clear: the storm had delivered a reckoning, its icy fury unearthing a truth that had been buried for far too long.